In the late 1940s, Soviet researchers allegedly locked 5 political prisoners inside a sealed chamber. The goal was to keep them awake for 15 consecutive days using an experimental airborne stimulant gas. For the first 5 days, everything was fine. Then the paranoia set in. The subjects stopped speaking to each other, instead whispering into the chamber's microphones. By day 9, one prisoner started screaming continuously for 3 hours, stopping only when he had physically torn his own vocal cords. On the 15th day, the researchers finally opened the heavy steel doors. Inside, they found the food rations untouched. The subjects had torn off their own skin and muscle, eviscerating themselves in a horrific display of self-mutilation and cannibalism. When a terrified researcher aimed a gun at the last surviving subject and demanded to know what these creatures were, the prisoner smiled. "We are you," he whispered. "We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your animal mind." This account spread rapidly across forums and social media, presented as suppressed historical fact. Millions of readers shared it, seemingly viewing it as a dark, forgotten chapter of Cold War science. This chart shows the massive spike in search interest for the experiment as the story exploded online. Reddit communities launched investigations into the event, authors wrote novels based on the text, and independent filmmakers adapted the events into physical movies. But the entire account is a fabrication. The story is a creepypasta, a piece of internet horror fiction designed to be copied and pasted across forums to frighten readers. It was written and published in August 2010 by an anonymous user going by the name Orange Soda. In an era where any fact can be checked in seconds, millions of rational, internet-savvy people still readily accepted a biological impossibility as documented history. Look closely at the original text, and the narrative begins to unravel. The author describes the chamber's observation glass as being 5 inches thick. However, Soviet scientists in the 1940s operated strictly on the metric system. They would have measured in centimeters. The story also prominently features a KGB commander overseeing the experiment in the late 1940s. The KGB was not actually established until 1954. Medically, the premise is impossible. A human being cannot survive the shock and blood loss of ripping out their own internal abdominal organs, much less hold a philosophical conversation with an armed researcher afterward. This behavior is explained by a framework called belief-dependent realism. Belief-dependent realism is a psychological theory where our beliefs form first based on emotional responses, and we then construct logical explanations to justify them, often ignoring facts that contradict our desired reality. We see the same mechanism in ancient oral traditions. The Native American myth of the Wendigo, a cannibalistic monster roaming the freezing forests, was born from the very real threat of winter starvation. We collectively ignore anachronisms and medical impossibilities because the narrative taps directly into universal, primal anxieties that bypass our logical filters. Documented medical history shows that the most enduring myths are usually anchored to a terrifying kernel of truth. In 1894, the Russian physician Marie de Manesine conducted some of the first pioneering experimental studies on sleep deprivation. She kept young puppies awake continuously to observe the physiological toll. Her findings, later confirmed by Italian physiologists Lamberto Dotti and Cesare Agostini, were definitive. The complete absence of sleep was fatal within a matter of days, regardless of food consumption. Post-mortem examinations showed that sleep loss triggered a state of auto-intoxication. Auto-intoxication is a process where the body is poisoned by its own uncleared metabolic waste, leading to severe degenerative lesions throughout the brain. The creepypasta feels plausible because our subconscious recognizes a biological reality. Extreme, prolonged sleeplessness physically destroys the nervous system. When digital stories cross into the physical world, it's called folkloric ostension, the acting out of a legend narrative. As researcher Linda Degg observed, narratives can turn into facts. Stories escape digital boundaries to provoke real-world actions, influencing what we create and fear. The Russian sleep experiment demonstrated this crossover, manifesting into physical film adaptations, printed horror novels, and genuine public anxiety. Online message boards have effectively replaced the physical campfire, allowing traditional folklore to scale across borders at a speed impossible for previous generations. These stories thrive on collective effort. Audiences actively suspend their disbelief, collaborating in comment sections to build a shared, terrifying world together. Despite our access to endless factual information, our minds remain susceptible to a well-told story. The monsters we fear the most are still the ones we create inside our own heads.